Professor, it's such a big honor to have you with us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your journey. So, I've been reading through the case that you shared with me about your work and also your reflections on the growth of Hong Kong UST over these years. And I was especially struck by how much of this university's rise is shaped by the vision and the dedication of a few key individuals like yourself. So it feels that every college has its defining period of growth and the people behind it become its soul. So I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've contributed not only to Hong Kong UST but also to many students across Hong Kong and beyond.
Okay, well, nice of you to say that. You may know this, but UCLA was one of our founding partners.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, UCLA, the dean at the time actually came from associate deanship of UCLA. He was called Pro Dean, and his name was Ernie Skalberg, and he was a friend of mine. And he
Oh,
was
wow.
here for 3 years because our president, Jiawei Wu, couldn't find a reputable dean candidate. So he borrowed
Mm-hmm.
this man from UCLA. And that's how I heard about the school because Ernie and I were good friends back in the US. And so Ernie was here, as I said, 3 years before Yakshi took on the first deanship from local.
Wow, that's amazing. And now, do the two schools still have partnerships or collaborations going on?
We certainly send exchange students back and forth. In fact, UCLA is one of our top destinations for our MBA program. But the
Oh,
formal relationship ended. It was a 3-year contract. And once that ended, the school was prepared, I guess, to stand on its own. And that's when I got hired.
oh, wow. That's such a coincidence. And yeah, I think I've heard some students who study abroad at HKUST here, through the UCEAP program, and it's so nice that there's been such a bond from so many years ago. That's
Yes.
lovely.
Yeah, this was back in the 90s when they were helping UST start up. So we owe a lot to UCLA.
Yeah, and same for us. And thank you so much for your time today. And when reading about your childhood, you've spoken about growing up in Bemidji and later spending an eye-opening year at Hawaii, where you suddenly found yourself surrounded by Chinese and Japanese classmates. So I'm curious, how did your childhood near the Mississippi River, surrounded by Native Americans, and your early experiences in the Midwest, did they shape the way you began to see the world and your place in it, as well as your later openness to move overseas to a whole different country and a place like Hong Kong?
Well, Wendy, you mentioned the Hawaii experience, which I think was transformative. Bemidji, Minnesota is a small town in northern Minnesota. As you say, the Mississippi River, it's near the headwaters, so it's way up north. Town of about 15,000, very homogeneous, very protected upbringing. People know everybody. It's one of these small towns. And I thought it was a very nice way to grow up. You know, you have your first
Yeah.
jobs there. In fact, I even went to university there for a few years. So it was a nice sort of supportive environment. But
Hmm.
the Hawaii experience, which happened when I was a ninth grade student, as I say, was transformative because I'd been in this very protected, homogeneous community, small town, and
Hmm.
we moved to Hawaii, a suburb basically of Honolulu, a larger city. But I was a minority.
Yeah.
It was a middle school, and I was a minority, which was quite a dramatic impact on me, not being from the normal population. In addition to the Asians, there were Hawaiian nationals, Hawaiian people who grew up in Hawaii. And
Oh.
so it really opened my eyes to diversity and what it would be like to move outside of my little environment. And so I think it kind of opened my eyes to an international career at a fairly early stage.
Yeah, that's a beautiful journey. And I think like at an age when you were grade 9, you were about like 14 and 15 years old. And as a teenager, that must have been a very eye-opening experiences being surrounded by different culture. I imagine like the music, food, and the slang as well as the way that people speak and communicate with each other must have been so different. And so, yeah, it really like makes sense how it shaped the way you feel the world as well as the way you sort of wanting to reach out to a bigger community later on. And I think that that finds a parallel also in your journey from studying psychology, as your father was a psychologist and you actually earned a PhD in school in sports psychology and statistics while you've worked for over 5 years with students with like special needs, with athletes as someone that really looks after these athletes before joining Kellogg in 1982. So I'm curious, like, how has this experience of working with students and athletes, especially those with emotional difficulties, like, did that teach you something about like business leadership and education later on? And did you find like some traits that like carried across an elite athlete and an elite businessman?
Well, I'll admit, in those days, I wasn't planning a business career at all. Psychology was a natural progression given I was raised by a psychologist, and it was sort of
Right.
natural for me. But I didn't start out in psychology. I started out in architecture. And
Oh,
this was because of a profound book that I read called The Fountainhead, which was written in the 40s. And it really did have a dramatic effect. It was about an architect, and it's a very
hmm,
famous book, and it's got controversial in a way because it's very supportive of self-interest and ego. It was sort of a dramatic book, but I started out in architecture. I was pretty good at drafting and numbers, but I didn't like the kind of the closed nature of it, working alone in
right.
an office, drawing. I was very
Hmm.
sociable. And so I
Right.
progressed into psychology. And the school psychologist position that I started out with, my first professional position, it was in Iowa, a very protected, nice community. But working with disabled students gave me a reputation of being not the person to go see. And
Oh,
so, given my interest in athletics and sports, I started working with athletes and sports teams. And so that way, there was no stigma to go see me because anybody, any peer who saw someone going to see me, who knows, they could be a gifted student, an athlete, or someone with learning problems. So I
right.
kind of did that to elevate my reputation in the high school that I worked in. And it was also personal interest. I was fascinated by the mental impact of on an athlete and how you can improve yourself just really with mind improvement. So I worked on sports psychology for a bit of time there, partly for personal interest.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story to hear. And I'm surprised by how you first started off in architecture. And I imagine like the rigor and also the math that was involved in the like statistical constructs of like building different structures. And later on, like you really mentioned how you love developing people. And yeah, I totally resonate with the part that you said about the stigma associated with like students that might be concerned about other people thinking that they might find you just because they have a disability. So it really shows like your compassion towards them by the way you sort of branch it out, like helping different athletes as well. And yeah, I think that must have been a very formative experience too, like moving on to education later on. And I've also read about like your during your younger years how you worked multiple jobs like at the Luton Village Foods. You talked about how the boss there really shaped your worldview, and you also worked at a resort near your childhood home. You teach skiing and sailing, and you even performed in a water skiing show. So were there any moments of uncertainty or difficulty like associated with those years of balancing your schoolwork as well as these jobs? And how did you find that whole process?
Well, the balance, it was a busy time, and I guess throughout my life I've stayed busy, and I have
Right.
a lot of interest in working. I guess I was raised with a strong work ethic, and I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate hard work. And in fact, I suspect I prefer working over school. I went to school because it was necessary, and now I'm at a
Mm-hmm.
university, which I really enjoy. But it's the applied side that I think motivated me more. And so I worked as a grocery store man. I worked in resorts. I worked in clothing stores, just part-time money to put myself through school. I've been a bartender. I'm actually licensed as a
Wow.
bartender in Wisconsin, and all those jobs just accumulated enough resource to maintain a student lifestyle. But I've been self-sufficient since my third year of university. My
Oh.
father certainly offered to pay for school, but I felt responsibility to do my own thing. And so a lot of the work was necessary in order to put myself through school.
Yeah, I imagine you must have been very dedicated and driven because, like, even with exams and all different kinds of commitments right now, we sometimes feel overwhelmed. But that sort of drive to, like, apply what you've learned in the jobs. And I imagine that when you're a bartender, when you're working at these grocery shops, you've seen like different kinds of people, and that really shaped the way that, like, how you identify talent later on and also like how you see different students, just like interacting with different people. So I totally resonate with how you mentioned about the sense of purpose right now when you're working in college in a field that you really love. And that's beautiful to hear. Um, Later on, I've also read about how you've spoken about the different mentors and the partners in your life and also your journey at Kellogg. For example, Dean Don Jacobs at Kellogg, as well as Dean Chan Yuk-shi, who invited you to come join Hong Kong UST, as well as the Associate Dean Ed Wilson, which played very important roles supporting your move here. So in Chinese, we often speak of the term guayan, which is people who appear at important moments and help open a path. So would you say that those individuals or certain mentors have been guiding figures in your life? And how do you see the importance of mentorship for like young people like us as well?
All right. Well, that's a pretty heavy question, but I'm going to back up. This probably isn't even on the internet, but there was a person who had a big impact on me back when I was a doctoral student at the University of Iowa. And his name was Willard Boyd, and he was the president of the university up until I think 81. I graduated in 82, so sadly he didn't sign my diploma. But I
Mhm.
watched him, I saw him in speeches, I read about him, and he inspired me actually towards a position in university administration. I saw my career changing from a psychologist to a university leader. And it was through his impact that I really redirected my efforts and went to business school. So
Oh,
Willard Boyd, whose nickname was Sandy Boyd, by the time I was at Northwestern, which is in a suburb of Chicago, he had relocated and became president of the Field Museum, which is a major institution in the US. It's downtown Chicago. And so, given my impression of him and my, I guess, silent mentorship, he didn't
hmm.
actually know me. I started bringing my classes down to the Field Museum to learn about nonprofit management, which was my
Oh,
major at the time. And I have yet to meet the man. In fact, I never will. He passed away 2 years ago at age 95. Willard Boyd, he was a law graduate of the University of Minnesota. And despite my knowledge of him and my awareness and the fact that he helped redirect my career, I never had the pleasure to meet the man. But he did write me a note. When I stepped down as chairman of the American Chamber, the staff of the chamber wrote to him and said, "You
wow.
inspired Professor DeKrey, and he's been a leader of our chamber, and would you write him a note?" And so Willard Boyd wrote a note to me congratulating me on my leadership. And it's a keepsake that I have to this day. This was maybe 10 years ago. So Willard Boyd was a very important mentor, despite the fact that I didn't meet him. But I would encourage, you have many people on this site, I think, who are looking at career decisions. And I would urge you to look around the world and see who are the people that most inspire you. You know, what type of job are they? Preachers? Are they business leaders? Are they government? You know, who are these people? It'll help you define your own value system. And it's really what I did with Willard Boyd. I was a little restless as a psychologist. It was less meaningful than I wanted. And so I went after a career change. This was back in the 80s, went to business school, which I had never intended to do. But after a PhD, I got an MBA degree, and that launched my career in business education.
Wow, that's great. And thank you so much for sharing this side of the story to us. I didn't read about President Boyd, but he seems like a very influential person to you. And
Absolutely.
I imagine it must have been a very full circle moment when you finally received that note. And it's so nice of the staff members at American Chamber for reaching out to him and letting him know. Because I know you also have a future leaders program. At the American
Yes, yes,
Chamber.
yes,
So
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
so that's beautiful that how he inspired you and now you are also inspiring the next generation, like all of us who are listening. So that's great. And I'm just curious to know, like, how did he inspire you? Like, did you read some of his books? Because just now you mentioned about how we can also find value in those. And for me, myself, I love like interviewing people and hearing about the stories from our guests as well. Also, like online podcasts with the very accessible information that we have nowadays is really convenient. But back then, did you read a book from him, or was it from like talks at the college?
No, yeah, I think I sat in on a few. He would address the student body or the faculty. Some of it was on television, frankly.
Hmm.
Some of it was face to face, but most of it was articles about him in the newspaper. I think it was called the Daily Iowan, which I read. And
Oh,
so I formulated a plan during those years because I knew I wouldn't stay in the school psychology field. I was finishing my PhD, looking at my future, and being
right.
inspired by this man redirected me. And I said, one day I'd like to be a school president. And I ultimately became that back in 2012. I was president of a school in Manila and it sort of finalized my goal. And I
Hmm.
realized that after putting in a term, what I really missed was teaching. And so working with students, and you don't get to as much when you're senior administration. So now that I'm semi-retired, went back into the classroom more, and I'm doing teaching, which is a very gratifying career plan, actually, and it's what motivated me early days.
Yeah, I can really feel the passion you have, Professor DeKrey, and also like towards the students and also like shaping the policies at the AIM. And that's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And after earning your MBA at Kellogg, you became the assistant dean and also the director of MBA admissions there. So a lot of our audience are also trying to apply to like MBA programs, and I could imagine that you've reviewed like thousands of these applications long before like those individuals became like executives or like successful businessmen later on. Well, you've also highlighted like a predictor called learning agility, which you see as part of a bigger potential apart from just like excellent GMAT scores, for example. So, was there like a particular spark that you were looking for beyond the credentials when you were screening those applications that signified like a bigger potential in these candidates?
Yeah, Wendy, when I was a full-time MBA student, I obviously connected with my classmates and I made an effort really to build that network. And I became quite familiar with many of my classmates. I had about 250, 300 in that first year class, but I was hired out of my first year class and I ended up joining the part-time MBA so I could be in
Oh,
the admissions office. I worked part-time, no, I worked full-time, but I was assistant for about 9 months and then the director left. And since I had a little experience and was an MBA student and already had a PhD, I was a logical choice to take over that office. And when I did so, I had a pretty good sense of what a good MBA student was because I'd been in the classroom and
Yeah.
I'd gotten to know so many of the classmates. And what I realized is much of what made a good leader, a good student, and a good graduate was the interpersonal skill. And so, despite the fact that it was never a requirement in any of the top business schools, I made an interview a requirement for any applicant to the Kellogg School of Management. And so we interviewed everybody. And clearly, I didn't have the staff. I had about 20 in my team, not enough to do interviews of everybody. So I leaned on my classmates. So all the students I got to know as first year MBA students, by the time I became director, they had graduated and I
That's
used them
alumni,
as
right?
interviewers. So I could immediately begin a requirement as an interview required for admission. And so it's looking for that spark that you talk about or the learning agility. The progress in jobs depends on how well you learn as you go. And we're not talking about book learning. We're talking about learning from life experiences,
Right.
making mistakes and learning from those. And an interview can get those out much better than any written document that one would provide. So we did interviews, and I think Kellogg is still interviewing all of the candidates, most anyway, last I checked. GMAT has become too important to many of the schools, partly because of the ranking system. But I
Yeah.
would not give an average GMAT when I was director. I would give a range. I didn't want people to be overly reliant on their test score because I knew that GMAT was not a good predictor of career. It would help
Mhm.
get you through school, and it did have some use in the admissions, but I didn't focus on it. And part of this is from a profound book that I read from Daniel Goleman, which is called Emotional Intelligence. And it resonated with my background as a psychologist. And
Right.
so I used a lot of that knowledge in admissions, and I've used it throughout my career. The fact that we're looking at social skill, interpersonal skill. Leadership is a social skill, it's not an academic skill. So when you're predicting leadership, you need to know about the capabilities they have working with other people. And frankly, that's what we look for in the interview.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so nice that you pioneered the whole interviewing process. I really feel that you love building things from the ground up and also innovating. And that's amazing because you take a humanistic side to evaluating the candidates and seeing their potential more comprehensively. And I think that's really important in business too, because you're not just looking at the papers, but also like how they interact with you and their personal characteristics as well. And thank you so much for sharing that book by David Goldman. I would love to like check it out. With like the emotional intelligence, I think that's very valuable. That's a very valuable quality as well.
Yeah,
And
Wendy,
later,
the name is
yeah.
Daniel Goleman. Daniel
Oh,
Goleman.
Daniel
Yeah,
Goldman.
not
Thank
David.
you.
In fact, he was so impressive to me that I got some donors to bring him to this campus back in the 90s.
Oh,
So he was a
wow.
speaker for us. He's very famous now. If you look him up, you'll see he's written many books since that first one. But I got him in as a speaker. One of our chairmen of our council had a major business, and he was able to fund a visit by Daniel. So yeah,
It's
he's very
awesome.
impactful. He did not invent emotional intelligence, but he
Hmm.
popularized it. It actually came from a guy named McClellan back in the 60s who identified multiple intelligences. But it's Daniel who made it famous. And now we all talk about EQ and
Right.
all of the skills that are necessary as a leader. In fact, we just had a meeting a few days ago on campus about the future of MBA with
Hmm.
AI being so prominent. Well, AI now takes care of content. So MBA programs now have to focus on interpersonal skill and they have
Hmm.
to focus on the uniqueness of humans that make them leaders. And so we have actually more opportunity now because we don't have to worry about learning accounting and statistics like we do now.
Yeah, that's great. And I think AI is definitely very relevant in nowadays context. And it's amazing that you had him like speak at that early stage of Hong Kong UST. And I think that if he gives a second visit, he must have been like so impressed by the growth and development of the university until now. And I've also read that UST included AI as a mandatory course for the curriculum in the undergraduate level. So that's amazing. Yeah, and that's so great to hear. And Professor, you've had such a front row seat, like in the evolution of Hong Kong UST and the student body. And I've read about like the profiles of the alumni at Kellogg, and especially with the ads at the Hong Kong International Airport. It's so amazing that these executives come from like all different walks of life, and they're also very senior in their field. So, in your experience, are there like some students who have left a lasting impression on you, like in the way that, as you mentioned, they have like great interpersonal skills, or do they share certain traits like humility, kindness, or diligence that made them stand out or led to their success later on?
Well, when I go through the list, there's so many. We have
Mhm.
over 1,000 graduates in the EMBA program. And
Wow.
when I helped start it up in the 90s, I did insist on interviewing every candidate. And so I actually did for the first 15 years. So once I had a personal connection, it was much easier to work with them because I knew them
Right.
personally and would spend more time getting to know the classmates. So that really gave me a front row to their development. I wouldn't think of any particular individuals, but some have actually become good friends. Some of our graduates I see now socially. And so it's an important sort of relationship once you develop it. And I've discovered in Asia, there's a deep respect for teachers, for faculty,
Yeah.
and it's very encouraging. In fact, I did teach at Northwestern and I taught at the University of Florida. But teaching
Mhm.
here is much more gratifying because I think students appreciate insights more and they have a deeper respect for faculty. And so those who I've befriended, it's been a very positive sort of relationship that we develop, and there are many that I can count to as friendly. So, when what are qualities of a friend are the same kind of qualities to me that make it in leadership, interpersonally strong and sense of humor and appreciation of others and openness to challenges. And I guess those are values that I embrace and those that I look for in my friendships and in my candidates.
Yeah, it's so impressive that you mentioned you made an effort to interview all these candidates. I imagine that it must have been like no easy task because there are just so many of them, but you try to know them on a personal level and still keep in touch after they've graduated, and that's like such a beautiful thing to hear because um here sometimes at UCLA I am also like able to meet some of my professors outside of class, and it's so surprising and nice to like get to know them personally and their personal interests. So I've seen like how the students have come to visit you from like Shenzhen, and you flew to different places to meet them as well, and that's great. So um, like I'm also curious about your transition to UST because just now you mentioned the University of Florida at Kellogg, and when you were invited by the late Dean Shi back then, you actually came to Hong Kong like within 6 months. So I'm wondering like what gave you that conviction to make this like massive geographical and cultural leap to somewhere that you might have not like visited before coming. So it must have seemed like such a bold decision at that time.
It was a very exciting decision. I referenced my Hawaii impact, the university there, but the schooling that I went to was middle school. But the impact in being in a unique setting was the beginning. But Kellogg opened up a partnership in Bangkok. And as Dean of Admission for Northwestern's Business School, I was in
Mhm.
charge of all admissions and marketing for the Bangkok school from 83 to 89. So I would travel there 2 weeks every year. It's now been named Sasin, but it's at Chulalongkorn, which is the leading school in Thailand. And we had a partnership. And so I would go there and interview candidates and advise the director on marketing efforts and all of that. So I had an exposure to Asia. During that trip, I would often visit alumni in either the Philippines or Japan, but I'd never been to Hong Kong. So when I met Dean Yuck-Shi, who was on the faculty at Northwestern when I was Dean of Admissions, so he knew me. I'll admit I didn't know him well. I had met him, but I would do presentations to the faculty on the admissions office. And so he had been exposed to me and was interested. And when he mentioned he had an opportunity, would I be interested? I jumped at it and said, wow, Hong Kong. I knew about it, never seen the city. I knew about it from my friend, as I mentioned, my UCLA friend, Arnie Skulberg. And so I was very interested. I was a little restless in the US. I was in a college town. I wasn't in a big city. University of Iowa was in Gainesville. I would have to travel to Miami just to have some contact with major businesses. And so I wanted a big city. I wanted an international move. I'm limited in my language skills. Obviously, most Americans only have English. And so here was a former colony. In fact, it was still a colony when I moved here. I was here 1 year before the handover. But my English skill was what they wanted. They wanted my US background. They knew that I had started up programs at several schools before. And so it was an easy decision for them and easy for me. So that meeting, I think, was in Chicago in 1995. I interviewed in the fall of 95, and I was on campus in January of 96. So it did happen very fast. And, it was an easy decision for me. Obviously these decisions have family involved, and I had children. And so you have to think about the impact. This interview is mostly about career decisions, but I'll confide that any decisions have to take family into account. And I do have 2 grown-up daughters now who I stay in close contact with. In fact, I call them every Monday. I have them on my little cup here.
Wow.
So they're very much a part of my life. And any career decision one makes, if you have family, you have to put them front and center. So
Yeah, it's beautiful how you put your daughters front and center and you still stay very close with them, although like sometimes they might be in the US and other times they might join you in Hong Kong. But that's that's great to hear that it was such a lovely like decision back then and you were really like curious to learn more about the world. While I imagine that your move to Hong Kong also helped like Hong Kong UST obviously like a lot during its early stages. And I'm curious to know, like back then, was there something that you've seen in Asia that made you feel that it would be a place of long-term growth and opportunity? And you mentioned about your friend, like Ernie at UCLA, that he had a chance to visit you later at the Hong Kong UST.
he never came here, but I did see him a couple of times. He ended up going to Fordham as dean, and then he went to Monterey Tech. He
Oh,
passed away just a few years back, and I haven't seen him for many years, but I
I'm
did
sorry.
see him after this. He wanted to stay here, by the way. He loved it so much, but the school needed to move on. I mean, he was representing UCLA, and at that point, this is back in the 90s, mid 90s, the school wanted to
Mhm.
be, kind of independent on its own and have UST people. And so, yeah, he was not offered a continuing contract because he would have been independent of UCLA at that point. So he went to Fordham, and I
Mhm.
came about a year or two after. One of my friends from University of Florida had already come here. And so there was one connection I had, and Yuxi Chan from Northwestern was here, but that was it. I really didn't know people. I didn't have a sense of the culture of the place. But after the interview, I really felt that it was a good fit. And I came here on a leave of absence from the University of Florida. And
Mhm.
within a year, I wrote to the dean back at Florida and I said, cancel my leave. And he said to me, Steve, it doesn't matter. You're just on a list. You have the option to come back. You don't have to cancel it. I said, I don't want the option to come back. I'm so happy here. This is such a great place that I know I'll be here for a long time. And he was quite surprised, but he said, okay, I'll take you off the list. And I shared that letter with my dean so they knew I was committed. And that's really why I did it, to show the people here that I wasn't a short-termer. I was actually committed. I was going to help build the school, and it made people a lot happier because they knew that a lot of our faculty came as visitors. They'd come for a couple years and go back to their home school. And I had that option, but I knew I would never go back to Florida after being here. This place was so fascinating, and there was so much to be done that I canceled my leave and stayed here. And I worked straight for 15 years before I moved to Manila.
Yeah, wow. I feel like the timing is so great, and also the opportunity to come to Hong Kong and your conviction to stay here for so many years really shows like your drive and also your love for shaping the education from the ground up. And I heard from another interview, in fact, by the Hong Kong UST, that during the early info sessions that you did for the Kellogg and UST program, you doubted whether there would be enough audience. So you invited your friends from Rotary and American Chamber, and even your girlfriend back then, who later became your wife, to come join. So it really feels like something that's very personal, and it really is very significant to you back then. Um, but then later on, you branched out to so many colleges worldwide, like the Moscow School of Management, the Saudi Arabia School, as well as I've read about like you spearheading a master's with a school in South Korea as well. So it must have been pretty messy behind the scenes, like because it's so international and you really have to like do all the communication work with these different institutions. So you were very proud later on when the EMBA program was ranked the first worldwide, and it really is like having your own baby or your own like venture, and then to finally having it recognized. So I'm curious, like what motivated you to keep going, like despite all the like uncertainty back then, and were there any challenges, like the biggest challenges that you've overcome, and would you mind like sharing a bit of that journey with us?
I think in any job, if you really are passionate about it, you're going to have some vision, right? You have some
Yeah.
goal that you're working towards. And in my mind, it was building international reputation. So the goal of my efforts were to build internationally reputation and to be known well outside of Hong Kong. In fact, during my early days, we created the goal of being the leading business school in Asia. And there was no such thing at the time. No one even considered Asia a place for business schools. This is back in the 90s. But our goal was to be the leading school in Asia. And what happened with our efforts is a lot of schools got better. So we not
Mm.
only got better ourselves, but the competition got a lot stronger. But
Yeah.
using that vision of being an international powerhouse then would drive you in the directions where the opportunities were. The opportunity in Saudi Arabia was not at a school, Wendy, it was at a company. And
Oh,
Saudi Aramco, which is one of the largest oil companies, one of the largest companies in the world, had approached us. And they approached us because while our EMBA was rated very high, our MBA was also rated in the top 10. And
yeah.
so the president himself from Saudi Aramco came to our campus and visited our president and asked for a meeting with myself and my staff. He wanted to figure out, why are you a top 10 school? You're brand new. You've only been around for, at that point, maybe 15, 20 years. And after that meeting, he invited us to do an MBA in Saudi Arabia. And so we did. We signed a 3 cohort program, and we would send faculty to Saudi Arabia. I was one of them. I did teach up there as well as being a director. I left shortly after the start of that program and ended up giving or nominating one of my colleagues here, Carolyn Wang, a female, which was quite a dramatic move in Saudi Arabia because they don't give equal status to women. And she's very capable. So it was kind of asserting our value system to have her manage it and run it up there. But, that's one example. The Russian program came much later. And that was an effort from their side to build international reputation. And given that had been my vision here, our president at the time invited me to lead that effort. And so I did that for about 4 years until the war started, and then we pulled out. But that was also an eye-opener. I'd never been to Russia. I didn't really understand the culture well, but as an open-minded, curious person, I was fascinated by the whole option. And so that was a real crown in my career to be able to help build up a school in Russia, because that was really something you never would have imagined doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely very groundbreaking. And it's nice that not only you have partnerships with schools and universities, but also the fact that Saudi Arabia, the company reached out to you. It's really a valuable opportunity both for the corporations to learn more about the MBA students and all the perspectives they and the faculty like you bring, as well as it's so nice to hear about how you nominated Catherine to become like the your successor to keep building the program, and that's amazing. So I really resonate with this because when I was building this podcast, I began by reaching out to like people and family, friends, and later on, although there are many like cold emails and rejections, but I'm really like grateful for the wise and kind guesses like yourself to be like our guesses here for Echo and also for Ascend. So I really loved hearing about that journey that you started to build and also the strong vision behind it. I think I saw a message from the chat, and one audience, her name is Ginny. She's curious to hear about like AI and its influence on the education, and especially like MBA programs nowadays. If you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about that.
Well, fortunately, I'm at an institution that is leading in AI. In fact, one of my graduates just wrote a book called Raising AI. Wu is his last name. He's DeKrey Wu. And I've been in touch with him because I'd like to develop an interview system that uses AI. And so we're working on that as an idea. But as far as education, we're all struggling with what the full impact will be. We're getting to know it. I mentioned we had a meeting recently where one of our faculty, who's pretty far ahead in using AI, gave a presentation. I know when AI first became optional here, I made it mandatory for my students to use AI to write a paper. I have a paper requirement where they pick a role model in leadership and they detail why they're impressed with that person and all that. And I asked them to, in fact, they didn't ask them, I required AI. I wanted them to use it. And at the time, some faculty saw that as cheating or it wasn't fair and they weren't actually thinking. I had the opposite view. I said, look, this is a tool. This will streamline work. Besides, it made a lot easier reading paper, right? AI writes pretty well. So that was me jumping on it. But now I'm looking ahead and I write a lot of cases. And of course, AI can write a case, write it overnight if it's based on library research and what's out on the web. And so it's certainly going to impact our own writing. But in the classroom, it's not clear how much impact it'll have. Clearly, memorizing data and information is no longer important. In fact, jobs like medical doctors and lawyers are going to really benefit from AI because a lot of their work depends on precedents and research and background. Business leaders certainly can benefit from using AI to build strategies and to do competitive research and all of that. And so we need to teach our students how to do that. But in the classroom, as I said earlier, what we need to do is improve negotiation skills, leadership skills, team management skills, interpersonal skills, all of the activity you need to influence others, I guess. It's all EQ stuff. But we now have more opportunity, more time to devote ourselves to what really matters in leadership. Because once you've learned the tools of AI where they can supplement and improve your work outside of, the data stuff, data-driven financial stuff, you can work on what really matters in driving institutions and governments and businesses forward, and that's, influencing others to get things done. So to me, AI is essentially, a supplement and a support activity that influences how we move forward. And, some of the fears are real. This book, Raising AI by DeKrey, I have not read it yet. It's fairly new. I'd like to get a hold of it. Maybe he'll send me a copy. But I would encourage whoever asked that question, to also do some digging. I'm sure it's becoming fairly influential at UCLA, which, being a leading school, would jump onto this activity. And now there are so many different large language models out there, and now they're fighting about OpenAI, and Elon Musk, who I wrote a case about, is now confronting his former colleague. There's a shakeup going on. But it's here to stay, and it's impressive, and it's amazing what can be done. And I think we're just now learning how we're going to embrace it. But there's a future ahead that's going to happen fairly quick. And I'm not sure how far it'll go before I'm not working anymore. But at least for now, I'm enjoying getting to know what it can do.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that insight, Professor. And another audience asked about how should we use AI professionally, like academically and personally, in a way that complements our skills and knowledge rather than taking us out of the equation. So would you say that we should like learn more about the technology? Because we often hear about like agentic AI, tokens, and OpenClaw, a lot of new technologies. So like for example, in your work right now, or in how you see like MBA students develop their skills and the qualities you mentioned, for example, interpersonal skills, can this be complemented by the new technology in a sense?
I think it actually can. I think you can actually practice interviewing using AI. You can develop some skills with AI as a helper. I mean, there's AI that now gets into counseling, and I suspect that AI
Right.
could be useful in job search and all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of activities that we now have more complicated ways of doing. So I'm not an expert. I'm not a technologist. In fact, as a psychologist, I'm a people oriented, but
Mm-hmm.
I do see huge future in AI. And I hope at some point I can develop an interview system where I can observe as a watcher my own self interviewing people. I think that would be fascinating. And that may happen because one of my future jobs may be in admissions to help out one of our staff. And since I'll be
Oh.
in the US all of the summer, I'd like to have a stand-in interviewer, which would be AI, interview the candidate. And then during a time zone that's functional for me in Minnesota, I would be
Mm-hmm.
able to observe the interview and then make decision on admission. So there's a very practical need for me to have an AI involved in the admissions process. So that's one way I'm looking at it for my own self. But there's going to be many, many ways. And whoever asked the question, they need to analyze their own workflow and what kind of job they're doing and where AI can help. Obviously, if you're an analyst, AI can almost replace you. If you're a researcher, it can almost replace you. And I'm sure, Wendy, when you came up with questions for me, you were using AI to do some of that work. And that's why you did
Yeah.
it so quickly. And you had access to all information about me on the web, which is a lot. There's a lot out there. And so AI can really speed up activity. And I
Yes.
think we all need to learn better how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's very creative how you mentioned about like doing those interviews in a different time zone. And I feel like it would be very effective and also efficient as well in like screening all those applications while you can also observe them. That's very practical. And moving back to some of your EMBA teaching experience, I'm really moved by how like the Hong Kong UST has built many describe as a family-like environment, and especially where the executives can connect with one another on a personal level, because you mentioned that a lot of them are already seniors in their fields, and sometimes they might feel a bit lonely at the level of governance and also in the corporate sense. But then, like these executives, when they're classmates, they have these bonding activities, they live together in the dorms, and the faculties would also reach out to them after the program to offer support. So that's really heartwarming. And so I'm curious, like, how do you personally think about trust? Because you've mentioned a couple of times that the most important asset of an organization is uplifting its people. And I imagine that that takes a lot of like a strong network and supporting system. And how can you like cultivate that in an organization from like an individual standpoint as a leader or as a junior, for example, an intern, like going into a company?
Well, you mentioned trust, and obviously it's a very important element of any relationship. Certainly in the job setting, having a trusted employer is critical. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
the prime reason people leave jobs is because they don't get along or don't trust their immediate boss. I talk about trust in my classes, and I certainly use it in my program that I teach for the Financial Times. I do a board development seminar. It's basically built on board behavior. As a psychologist, that's really where my leanings are. But when I talk about trust, I talk about the elements that contribute to building it. And
Mm-hmm.
in doing so, I have a list of professions that I borrowed from another researcher, and I asked students to define their trustworthiness. And it's a list of about 20 different professions. And unfortunately, business leaders are low on that category.
Mm-hmm.
We read a lot about the corruption in business and some of the self-interest of business leaders, and unfortunately, the reputation is not what it should be. And in
Yeah.
fact, the top profession, trustworthiness profession, is actually nursing. Nursing
Oh,
always has the number one role as being trustworthy, and most medical professionals are at the top half, certainly. But
yeah.
unfortunately, business people, whether they're stockbrokers or journalists or whatever, they don't have a strong trustworthiness. And part of it is because really what they're after is resources and financial, where medical people are there to help you. And so we have more trust in them. But building trust, there are a number of things one has to do. And it certainly is, doing what you say you'll do, being reliable and being considerate of others and being empathetic and all that. But trust is critical, and we talk about building it. And certainly we want people around us that whom we trust. And when trust is broken, it can stop a relationship. So we have to pay attention.
Yeah, it's really eye-opening and insightful to hear that like the medical professionals have a very high level of trustworthiness, while like business leaders might be associated with like profit making or self-interests that might affect their trust levels. So I think it's indeed like very precious to have that sort of trust in like sometimes competitive and high stakes job settings, like in banks or consulting firms, for example. And I think whenever there's teamwork, there's also like difficulties sometimes in like coordinating and negotiating with different people. So I'm actually curious if Professor, you would have any advice for us in terms of like working with teammates that sometimes are hard to work with or might have like different work styles than us. For example, I've read about how you've mentioned and also how your colleagues actually praised your ability to like trust people and also like avoid micromanagement sometimes. So would you have any tips for us on that in terms of teamwork?
That's a big question. I'll tell you an anecdote that goes way
Mm-hmm.
back. Northwestern's business school, where I went to school in the 80s, is based in the Midwest. And Midwest America is known for friendly, sort of engaging people,
Right.
lack of arrogance, lack of ego, kind of in general. That differs maybe from the two coasts in some ways. And so the business school developed a reputation naturally for being team oriented. People work together. And so when our dean at the time was meeting with some of the other top deans, this was reported in the press, and I was around at the time, and he told me personally what happened, but he was sharing the model of education at Kellogg where people are given group assignments and often they're graded as a team, right? One
Yeah.
grade goes to 6 people. And so that was rather innovative, and it was really mandating that you work hard together and pull your
Hmm.
own weight. And when he described that to the top schools, the dean of MIT said, "We call that cheating at MIT." And in
Oh.
the early days, sharing information and working together was not how the education worked. And certainly at a lot of the top business schools, it was very independent. And you
Hmm.
didn't lean on your classmates. It was, one man for himself or one woman for herself. And so Kellogg developed that reputation. And having gone there, I guess I appreciated that and have always tried to impact that value on any school I was at. Teamwork and group activity and case study with classmates is really how you develop those skills. You have to appreciate differences if you're going to work in a team.
Yeah.
Um, One of my faculty mentioned to me recently, he said, the reason I'm a faculty member is I don't work well with other people. So I found that rather dramatic because I actually embrace teamwork myself. So it's not unique to faculty. But clearly appreciating others and input, boards are teams, right? And I do some
Yeah.
board development for the Financial Times, teaching people how
Hmm.
to contribute in a board of directors. And you have to embrace differences when you're on a board, especially nowadays where diversity is so critical, diversity of thought as well as diversity of background. And so you have to be willing to pay attention and embrace, the values that other people bring and not just look for confirming your own views. And to me, that's really what a board can bring. And at the end of it, if you're looking for, some kind of an agreement, you're looking for a consensus. And that means people have to be willing to moderate their own views, right? Because they all come with
Hmm.
their own idea. When I was chairman of the American Chamber Board, I would come in with an issue, but I would not come in with a decision. I would not try to influence the direction. As a board chairman, your job is facilitation. And so you
Yeah.
need to appreciate input from others. And eventually, a lot of times, the decisions were very different from what I might have guessed. And
Hmm.
it evolved from the discussion. And that's really what teamwork should do. You should come up with a unique and fairly maybe surprising result. And when you do strategy discussions and all of that, and if you're creative and open-minded, it's really hard to predict where it'll go. You just let the team decide. And so appreciating that, it's kind of a personality trait where you appreciate other people. As a psychologist, of course, that's natural. My view is if I were that person, I'd act exactly the same way. And so if you view that, if you know that if you were that person, you would act like they do, then you appreciate why they act that way. And so it's a little bit of I guess, a value system you take with you to any group. And the discussions will benefit if everybody thinks that way.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you so much for sharing that with us because I do feel that like teamwork and these discussions, as you mentioned at Kellogg with the case studies and also at American Chamber with so many different perspectives and the diversity of thought would really help you make better decisions when you take in those perspectives holistically. And yeah, I think teamwork is definitely beautiful when everyone can appreciate what others say and sort of like work towards a common goal together. And on a personal level, your research shows that, like, to handle high workloads, executives sometimes might have to lean on the four F's, which is family, friends, fellowship, and faith. And I'm curious, does that also apply to your personal journey? Because you were constantly traveling. As you mentioned, you traveled to Saudi Arabia, you worked in Thailand, and later on you moved to Philippines and to Hong Kong, obviously. So during all these travels, have you ever felt the feeling of burnt out or like a time period where you felt that it was particularly stressful? And did you lean on those pillars to help support you go through it?
Well, let me make one comment about traveling. I
Mm-hmm.
embrace it. I enjoy it. I like seeing new things. I like meeting new people. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
always exciting when I would travel. And I've traveled, as you said, considerably over the last 40 years. In fact, there was a
Yeah.
time where I was a diamond member, which is the top flyer of two different airlines. So that
Wow.
shows the kind of miles I was putting on. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll admit I don't actually like flying. I mean, I do it, and sometimes it's fine, but it's not a preference. I like to be there. In fact, I would prefer trains myself. I like trains a lot. But anyway, so I've flown a lot, and in terms of support, obviously family means a lot, and it kind of gives you purpose, really. I mean,
Yes.
purpose, a job alone is not a personal purpose. It's part of your purpose, but the purpose in a job is also family related. I mean, you have to provide a livelihood and you want to be a role model and you want to inspire your children and all of that factors into how you behave. But as far as personal support, I would say friendship and my wife obviously is a very important part of keeping you, sort of sane and
Yes.
keeping you on track. And now that I'm part-time, we have more time together and we travel a bit socially as well, in addition to business. My business travel is much reduced. And so I'm no longer a diamond member of any airline, but we travel for fun. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess you're trying to talk about how you manage stress. Well, um, going to gym is a part that I do. I still to this day spend some time in the gym almost every day. Minimal to compare to what I used to do. I used to run 40 miles a week
Wow.
for a 10-year period when I was, competing in 10Ks and I did triathlons and I did one marathon. One was enough, believe me. But I think physical activity, one of
Mm-hmm.
your preparation questions had to do with sports, athletic, and
Yes.
hobbies. And they keep you grounded. You've got sort of things to look forward to in your off time. And I don't work all the time. In fact, now far less than in the early days. And you fill your time with hobbies. I do a lot of reading. I'm reading a new book, by the way, which I think I can already recommend. It's called Inspire. It's a
Oh.
leadership book by Adam Galinsky, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
about a third of the way through. He was a Kellogg faculty, and I knew of him. I don't think we overlapped, but I do a bit of reading, a lot of
That's
fiction, but
great.
some nonfiction to keep up to date. And so reading is a good escape and a good builder, good content
Mm-hmm.
replacer, I guess. Swimming, I don't do so much anymore, but those kind of things and just socializing. We spent
Mm-hmm.
4 days with friends in Malaysia last week and we had a great time playing
Right.
golf and having a nice time in KL. And, so I think staying busy is important. Hong Kong is a beautiful city and we know a lot of people here. We have family here. We 2 nights ago we went to Sai Kung and had a nice seafood dinner and all of that leads to lifestyle and
Mm-hmm.
makes it just an exciting life.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing like the book Inspire and also the family as you've mentioned as well as travel. I do love traveling too. Oh wow. I
Yeah,
really
I've
love
got
how
it
it
on my
blends with
desk.
your background, like
I'm
the blue
sorry?
color. I
Yeah,
love the color.
yeah, it's new. It was published, I think, in 25, but One of my former speakers, his name is Daniel Pink. He's a very good speaker. He also happens to be a Northwestern graduate, but I brought him to Hong Kong 25 years ago as a speaker in one of our exec programs. And I was watching a podcast of his, and he recommended this book. This is about a month ago. And so on his recommendation, I bought it and then found out it was written by somebody I knew. So anyway, it's just a current thing that I'm reading. I also read a lot of nonfiction. Things like that keep you engaged and grounded, and I think keeps your mind busy, which is, I think, useful when you get older.
Yes, indeed. And I think like if traveling physically is like seeing and feeling all different cultures, then a book is really helpful like during your commute or when sometimes you're busy at work, you can also like use that as a mental escape. So that's awesome. And thank you for sharing those tips with us. I'm very like interested when I see that you actually have a scuba diving license and also like a vessel operating license. Those seem like very surprising hobbies to have, but it's amazing. I would love to like try out vessel operating if I have the chance in the future too.
Yeah, well, I grew up on a lake. My family lived on a
Oh
lake in
yeah.
northern Minnesota, so boats have been a part of my life since early days. And at one point, I owned 3 different boats, but now we're down to
Hmm.
one. I sold the one in Hong Kong last year. I had one here for 25 years. And the one in Minnesota, we still have. We'll keep at least one boat. So when we go back there for the summer, we have a boat. But yeah, I had to get licensed to use a boat in Hong Kong. In the US,
Oh.
that's not required. But I had up to a 36-foot, cabin cruiser, and you have to be licensed. This is a major
Hmm.
harbor. So to be able to drive around or to conduct a boat, you have to be, aware of the laws and all that. So yeah, I did get
Hmm.
a license. I had to. I've since let it go because I sold the boat. But scuba diving is a great hobby and it's very doable in Southeast Asia. Living in the Philippines was really comfortable because there's some of the best dive sites in the world are in the Philippines. So we did a bit of it. My wife dives, and so we did it
Oh.
together. It was a couple kind of thing. I dove more than she, and I went through all the training and became a master diver. And it's been a while. I guess I did dive last year in the Philippines, but Hong Kong doesn't have as good a diving as Philippines, so we don't do it so
Hmm.
much.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And with Hong Kong USD so close to the ocean into Sai it must have been nice, like just traveling here and there and to like see the ocean. For us here in LA, we see like Santa Monica and people surf, and I feel like that connection with nature also really helps with stress relief and like carrying on with life in general. So just now, Professor, you've mentioned like your time at the Asian Institute of Management, and you've also been very involved in community work like the Rotary. I saw that you've been a member for over 30 years in 3 different clubs. And also with your work at the American Chamber. So, are there like some little stories or fond memories of the time when you've like been for these places and institutions? I've seen this video on YouTube where you did the ice bucket challenge for the ALS patients, and that's very meaningful. While you also recruited like the first female president for the Asian Institute of Management, even though like some sort of like leader differences in opinions regarding the leadership style later influenced your decision to like come back to Hong Kong, but that seems like such a nice legacy that you've left there as well.
Yeah, the current president is the woman that I brought in as dean. Back in this would have been 2015. So she's now
Right.
in her third 5-year term and she's doing a great job.
Wow.
Chick Young is her name, Chick Young Chang, and
Hmm.
she's from Korea but educated in the West and has a very strong marketing capability. She's been very good for that school. But yeah, there's some things you do because people ask you. The ACLU activity. I think it was a donor who asked me. And then what you're supposed to do is you go through the bucket challenge and then you nominate somebody else. And so I nominated one of my board members, Ayala, Jaime Augusto Ayala, who's one of the leading leaders in the Philippines. And I think he actually went through with it. So that was a fun exercise. But I think that's another part that I would encourage my students to do, is not only because it's helpful, but it's also good relationship building. It helps your interpersonal skill to do other activity outside of your job, and it gives you kind of a basis for, I think, it's appreciation of where you live. The American Chamber is a very prominent organization, has a lot of influence, and it also has a lot of linkages. When I was chairman, there were a lot of people coming in that I got to meet as a result of being chair. Some very interesting high-flying figures. In the Philippines, I actually was able to go to a dinner hosting Obama.
Oh.
What do they call a state dinner? I guess a state dinner. It was hosted by the president, and I was attendee. As an American citizen leading one of the leading business schools, I was known by the other American, the ambassador, and all that. So I had a nice role there. Obviously, I had some impact, but frankly, after one term, my wife and I decided we'd prefer to live in Hong Kong, and my dean became president. We returned and had a great few years up until now, working in Russia and writing cases and teaching class. So we love Hong Kong. So we're glad to be back. That was a nice experience. I really appreciate the Filipino people. I have a lot of good friends there left behind. And in fact, I went to see them last year, had a meal with my golf buddies and things like that. So yeah, the Philippines was a good experience. And as I say, that was my goal. Back in the 70s, I determined that I wanted to be a president, and so it happened. And now I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, wow. It's so nice hearing all of your great experiences in the Philippines as well as this whole journey and even getting to host President Obama there. It must have been such a proud moment for you, and also it's nice seeing someone from the US coming to a new place like the Philippines, and with you being the anchor there as an educator. And I've read that you are actually the first academic to lead the American Chamber. So that's really impressive. And I think that all you've done to shape the work of AmCham is really great to hear as well. So maybe just one last question from me before I open it up to audience Q&A. And with such a long journey and also a very international footprint from the US to Hong Kong, Philippines, and so much more, do you believe in the significance of fate and timing and how your career unfolds? Because you said that you originally never thought that you would lead a business school education journey, but now you're so grounded in so many different teaching at the Financial Times, so on and so forth. And what advice would you give for probably young students who feel uncertain about their future? They're not sure how to plan, especially with the uncertainty surrounding AI technology, and there are so many opportunities, but also a lot of doubts that surround their future. What sort of encouragement would you give to them? And would you say that having a perspective that's more international, to travel out and to bridge the East and West, would you say that perspective is also something that you find valuable in today's world?
All right, I'm trying to boil down the question
I'm sorry,
behind
it's a bit long.
your
Yeah.
oratory, but let me say this. I certainly never imagined sitting in Bemidji, Minnesota, that I would end up with a career in Asia, and that I would be leading a school or building up schools and being an international expert. That evolved. And what I encourage younger people to do is build step by step. You may have a vision of some goal you have in mind, but things will come up. When we talk about intelligence, and I've given many IQ tests in my earlier career, but the definition of intelligence is the prosperous adaptation to life. So it's really
Oh,
about learning from life. It's not about the books or the IQ tests. It's really about evolution in your career path, and you build step by step. The opportunities that I was presented, I took advantage of, the ones that seemed to fit, and I didn't shy away. I guess I was confident that it could be done, and it did. And so all the job steps that I've taken were not pre-planned. There are
mhm,
opportunities that came up as I was, working my way through. Now you have to be credible, and you have to put the time in, and you have to be productive and useful to get opportunities. But I think it's very difficult to look too far ahead. In fact, with my daughters, I didn't even ask them what they were going to major in because things change. I mean, I was an
yeah,
architecture major, I became a psychologist, and now I'm an academic administrator and a teacher. Things evolve, and prosperous adaptation to life really focuses you on, you know, responding to what life brings to you. It's not, trying to overly influence, but take advantage of opportunities as they come. People who are faith oriented or who have really strong spiritual viewpoint may see things as predestined. To
mhm,
me, I look at them as opportunities that may come up, and be open to them. There are people who don't leave their hometown. I mean, I have a brother
mhm.
who is a doctor, and he's living in Bemidji, Minnesota. I mean,
Oh,
actually, he lives in the house that I grew up in. He bought the house from my father, and he's a very prominent doctor in that little town, and he's very happy.
that's
That's
great.
not something that would work for me. I
Mhm.
needed more exposure, more challenge, more activity, more, interesting diversity and travel. And so different people will have a different orientation. Some people are much happier being, comfortable in their homes and
Mhm.
staying where their people are. To me, I like to be exposed and to prosper outside of new environments. And so it's really a personal decision. Not everyone wants to be an East-West business school professor, but
Uh-huh.
it suits me. And I have to reference one book. It's called Grit.
Grit.
It's a very well-known, yeah, you may know about it. Grit it's been around a while, and it talks about perseverance and how important perseverance is in accomplishment, that it's critical. People who really work hard and stick with it are the ones
Mhm.
who make things happen. But this new author that I told you about, Adam Galinsky, he says
Yeah.
perseverance is not enough. It has to be paired with passion. And so
Mhm.
if I'm talking to young people about their career direction, I ask them, what is their passion? What do you really care about? And then find a way to make a living making that happen. Because if you're passionate, your motivation will be double what any other motivation could
Absolutely.
be.
Yeah.
So being passionate about your endeavor is really critical if you want to be successful. And if you're passionate about new ideas and new challenges and new movements, then you may end up like me, making a lot of different roles in your jobs.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that advice with us, Professor. And especially you mentioned like different people have different trajectories and interests, so we should also try to embrace what we truly love. Like your brother, he loves being a doctor and he would like to stay in the hometown. So that's also a very like beautiful and meaningful life that he would lead as well. Whereas for you, you have like a love for exploring the world. So I think that definitely everyone has their own definitions of the meaning to life, and we shouldn't limit ourselves to just one path because there are so many different opportunities. But we can also always have that grit and that passion to find out what we truly love and be really good at it so that we can make a living out of it. So I really appreciate all the advice and the lessons that you taught us today. And now, if the audience, if you guys would have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or to type in the chat.
Wendy, I just looked up and you've got over 80 people on this chat. That's pretty impressive. I hope some of them have questions.
Yeah, sometimes they're a bit shy, but let's see if anyone has any popping questions.
Yeah, they can type them in too. You know, I don't
Hmm.
think I can see what you're seeing, but you can read the questions to me.
Sure. Um, One from Vet, he asked, how did you adapt to China? That was his question.
Well, it was a transition because I moved to Hong Kong, which as a British colony was very westernized. And in fact, it's probably the best East-West place in the world because it did have that colonial influence by the Brits, but it was 95% Chinese. So it was a good transition. But from this base, I would travel to China frequently. Obviously, we have a lot of student connection there. We have businesses that are interested in our exec ed, and there were obviously some recruitment going on. So I would travel there frequently. So if you're talking mainland China, which versus Hong Kong versus other places, it too has changed because my first visit was in the mid 90s. And at that time, it was barely opened up. And in fact, we were encouraged, required by the hotelier to bring hard currency. We had to pay cash for our hotel room. You know, they wanted US dollars. It was really a very different place. So it's come a long way. But, you know, I guess I embraced a lot of the culture of China, the hardworking and intellectually oriented, academic, believes in harmony, you know, well-mannered people. So I don't really find it difficult to adjust. You know, if you're an open-minded, empathetic person, crossing cultures is enjoyable. So I guess I never saw it as a threat. I was excited about it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Professor. And I really do think that like the culture might be a little different between like Hong Kong back then and China, but with the integration with the mainland and also all the exciting developments in the infrastructure and also seeing a lot of Hong Kongers travel to China like during the weekends to like spend their time there. And it's really lovely like seeing how those changes has happened. And I also see another question from Dallas. He said he's at UNC, and his question is, how do individuals position themselves to enter and contribute meaningfully to elite international networks early on?
UNC meaning University of North Carolina?
Yeah, UNC Chapel Hill.
Oh, Chapel Hill. Yeah, very good school.
Yeah.
You know, if I were a student at a school like UNC, I would look for the international students. You know, they have them. A lot of activities around welcoming them and making friends with people would be an early stage. But, you know, building an international network in the US is not simple. I mean, I would encourage you, if you have the chance, to go on exchanges, to really spend some time overseas, use your summer. Maybe you can do an internship somewhere outside of the US. Or I don't know if it's your home country or not. I don't know where you're from, but building an international network isn't simple. And, you know, I was lucky that I had the opportunity to make a big move. I don't say up until that point that I had a really strong network, although I had a lot of Kellogg classmates who were overseas and stayed in touch with a lot of them, some in France, some in Japan, some in Korea, Philippines. So that happened through classmate connection. But career connection, you really have to be productive somewhere overseas. So an internship, doing an exchange, building your network when you're there. Some of exchange partners allow you to use the career service office of that visit school. And so that may give you an opportunity to look for opportunity. But As far as building a network, you got to find where they are. Where are the international people, and how can you meet them?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that definitely working with different students from very international backgrounds would be a great starting point. And I really appreciate that advice too, Professor. I have one more question from Jing Ru, and she says, "Thank you so much for speaking with us today." And she's wondering if you would have any advice for students in their early career in balancing exploring their passions and setting themselves up for more professional opportunities in the future, like investment banking and consulting. So specifically, the cost and benefits of founding versus joining a big company as their first job.
Well, that's of course very dependent on the person. You know,
Mm,
entrepreneurs are different in personality, perhaps, maybe a little bit higher risk taking, and maybe they don't have immediate dependence, so they can take a risk. In terms of development, here's a caution that I brought into UST when I moved here. I would seek extracurricular activity to develop network and skills. Many of our students here, because Chinese are so academic oriented and families
mhm.
are so dependent on, evaluating grades and pushing their kids to excel in school, they miss out on a lot of extracurriculars that would help develop the other skills that are critical in the job. I used to bring in big name speakers to my MBA program early days, and students wouldn't show up. So I'd have some major figure from downtown Hong Kong on campus, and I'd have maybe 8 people, and I had a class of 120. And so I
Mm,
really worked hard to get them to open their eyes. And of course, some of it is I got to make sure my schedule works for them. They don't have a test the next day or whatever it is. But I would urge any of the listeners to really take advantage of the education outside of the classroom. Whether it be organizations that have a group activity, whether it's travel, take a ski trip with your classmates. A lot of schools organize those kind of things. I would take advantage of that. Not only networking, but international exposure, perhaps, or some travel involved. Do those kinds of things, and you'll be surprised at the opportunities that open up.
yeah, definitely. I think that like doing these activities inside and outside of the classroom, like for ski trips or just for like those little conversations would really help with the way we feel the world as well as like connect ourselves with the classmates surrounding us. Because for now, I also love having like these meals or like catching up with different classmates and seeing how like everyone has grown from freshman year until now has also been a very like nice experience for me. So I totally agree with what you shared. I also have one last question before we end the session today, which is from um, a student studying in Shanghai, and he's curious about like what advice would you give to a young Asian woman business leader right now if she wants to success in the workplace because she has read about how you really value gender equality like at the Rotary Club and also you recruited the new president at the AIM. So we'd love to hear about like what advice would you have?
Well, I'm encouraged by the enlightenment, I think, these days of appreciation for gender balance and female contribution. So I don't see the ceiling being as strong as it had been in the past. So I
Mm,
doubt that there's as much resistance now. And if you're capable and successful in your work, I don't see that there's a limiting factor. But as with anybody else, building network and proving yourself, whether you're male or female, is critical to advancement. And so you have to produce, and male, female equal in terms of capability in my mind. And so, yes, I think in some of the early days we leaned towards female participation because we had to fill a gap. There just wasn't enough. I was also chairman of a search committee of the American Chamber, and we brought in our first female president some years back.
Oh.
And so I'm certainly an advocate, but I don't see it as a limiting issue as much as it was back in the early days. And so I'm hopeful that whoever this woman is in Shanghai, she will find opportunities. And if she proves herself, I don't see any problem.
Thank you, Professor. And if you would have time, would you mind answering one last question?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's from a freshman called Dorothy from the University of Pennsylvania, and she would love to hear about your suggestions on cross-disciplinary job search and practice for business students as someone just starting out in college. And because like there are different programs like JD and MBA programs, and sometimes like MBA degrees match up with another major like in arts or sciences. So would love to hear like your advice for someone like just starting out.
Well, as an educator, I believe in learning, and so a dual degree gives you more access. So I think certainly from a learning point, it's a positive. Whether it aims you at the job you want, you have to do your research and find out and make sure. But we just opened up a campus in Guangzhou, and we do not have departments. We do not have departments. We have concepts. And so instead of a business school, we have a society hub. And so it's contributing the talent to build a society. That would include government leadership and business leadership and academic leadership. And so as an institution, our HKUST leadership really initiated this. Our former president, Wei Shi, was the driver. But I'm a believer in cross-disciplinary concepts. I don't see specializing as a future goal. It may be your starting point. You may have to have some kind of expertise in order to gain access to a career path. But clearly, the more generalized you can be, the better the future will be if you want to be on top of an organization with multiple disciplines. And that's what presidents and leaders have to be able to do. So cross-disciplinary study, I guess I'm an example, having done an MBA degree, which is certainly different from a PhD in psychology, gives me a lot of insight. One of my faculty in MBA school said, "Why are you taking a stat course? You were a statistics major in your PhD." I said, "Because I want to see how business applies it. I want to know from your side what's important about statistics." And I think if you have that kind of curiosity, all disciplines can have positive impact. So cross-disciplinary study to me is great. We have dual degrees here. I've initiated some in my own past. We have engineering, business dual degrees at UST. And I think that's very, very smart, especially these days, because the future is really technology driven. We've talked enough about AI to understand that. So having a sense of the technology in any discipline added on would certainly benefit the student.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor DeKrey, and also all your suggestions with like embracing these different disciplines and sometimes like having multiple skill sets could only benefit you if you like are dedicated to lifelong learning and you really have that versatility to adapt to different needs in like jobs and also in different careers as well. And I really appreciate all the tips and the stories that you shared with us today. That was amazing. And it's a lovely conversation and chance to get to meet and also to learn from you.
Well, Wendy, I've enjoyed it. And let me thank the 80-some people who hung with us. I'm impressed. And if you do have feedback, I'd appreciate, letting Wendy know. I always ask for feedback when I teach. I always
Mhm.
ask for feedback when I give speeches. And so if this has been useful, I'd like to hear about it from you and let me know. And good luck. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you so much, Professor. I really appreciate it and would definitely share any feedback that I receive. I hope that everyone has also enjoyed this session today. And I hope you have a lovely day, Professor, and have a nice call with your daughters. It's one
Yes,
day out
well,
in Hong Kong.
and thank you, Wendy, for your organization. Very impressive. So good luck to your future and to all of your audience members. So take care. I'm going to log out here. So
Thank you.
enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye.